On a February evening, on the route from Bludenz to Feldkirch, I met a priest who'd lived for 45 years in an alpine village. 45 years in the same mountains, with the same people, in the same chapel. His hands were large and rough, not soft as you might think, but furrowed like tree bark, as if he'd spent his whole life chiseling stone, building houses of God, blessing people. Or as if the stone had chiseled him, pressed him into a form that fit the mountains. And his eyes were light and blue, like the ice on a mountain lake, with that clarity that only people have who've lived long in heights. People to whom the mountain has revealed its secrets, who've learned to understand the language of silence. He said his name was Father Augustin, and he was traveling to a funeral of a friend, a person he'd known since 1978. 45 years of friendship. That's a whole life together. That's not just friendship. That's family. That's being grown together. That's a love that needs no words. The train was almost empty. Just a few other passengers in the back rows, people with their own journeys. And this priest sat across from me, his black cassock still pristine, as if he'd just come from Mass, from a blessing. And I felt at once that this was no chance meeting. I asked him what it was like. 45 years in the same mountains, in a village perhaps 20 kilometers from the next large town. He laughed softly, but not a contemptuous laugh. The laughter was like snowfall, quiet, gentle, unhurried. A laughter that knew that no answer behind the question could improve it. A laughter that said, "I have time. The train has time. We all have time now, on this journey into the unknown." He said, "You know, people think that loneliness is the greatest suffering. That's their fear. But actually, loneliness is only a name for something we don't understand, for something we fear without knowing it. In the mountains, you learn that you're never alone. There's always something that speaks to you. The wind, the water, the stone, the blood in your veins, the breathing of your lungs. They all speak, if you're still enough to listen, if you're willing to learn that language. The mountain itself, it's alive, a living being, with thousands of years of memory. And the people who come, they come to you because they feel that too. This life that's stronger than words." The train climbed into the mountains, faster, higher, ever higher. Outside, everything was white. Deep snow that simplified the world, that erased all differences. Firs like black arrows pointing to the sky, fighting against the weight of the ice. The air grew colder. I could feel it through the smallest gap in the window. This intense scent of height and ice and solitude. A scent that told that only the brave or the desperate lived here. The priest looked out with an expression, as if reading an old letter he knew by heart. A letter that was decades old, that described every chapter of his existence. As if he knew every tree, every spot of snow, already, personally, like old friends. And he told me of his village, how small it was, perhaps 80 people, or fewer now over the years, in a valley where even in summer the sun came only a few hours. a village forgotten by the world, but not forgotten by God. But every one of these people, every family, every child, every animal, was imprinted on him like a face you carry all your life. He could name the names of the children, every generation, every name, from the first to the last. And he would also know what had become of each. His voice grew quieter, even stiller, as if coming from great depth. It was as if the mountain itself began to speak, through his voice, the voice of a place that had existed for millennia. He said, "My friend, the one whose funeral I'm going to, he was a wood carver. All his life he carved crosses from stone pine wood, that wood that comes from the highest mountains, that smells of height, of snow and silence, and all the years the tree lived. Small crosses, large crosses, crosses for houses, crosses for graves, crosses you wore as jewelry and protection. Each cross a story, a family, a life, a farewell, a moment of grief or faith. And you know, at the end, he told me, just before he became ill, I didn't know what story I should carve. I just looked at the wood and waited until the story showed me what was hidden in it. The wood already had everything I needed. I was just the tool, a hand that respects the wood. That's a very good way to live, I think. That's a way of understanding the world, not as something you shape and control, but as something that shapes you, that teaches you, if you listen. I sat very still and listened. The train was so quiet now, or perhaps I was just very attentive. His voice, the voice of a man who'd lived decades in the heights. It had the quality of the mountain itself. Slow, deep, unshakable. Father Augustine rested his head back, his eyes closed, but not to sleep, rather to remember. It was as if he were turning through the years, like in an album. And he spoke, half to me, half to himself, of the things he'd seen. A spring when the whole mountain was white with snowdrops, 1,000 tiny flowers, like the mountain itself prayed. An autumn when the larches turned to gold, fire that doesn't burn but only shines. A winter so cold that the water in the fountains simply stood like frozen amber. And many people who came to pray, people who left to return to the cities, and people who stayed, even though the mountains were heavy, even though the solitude was great. They stayed because the mountain gave them everything they needed. But you know, he said, and his eyes opened again, clear as mountain water. The heaviness is not the worst thing. The worst thing is when you forget that the heaviness also brings blessing. A mountain that's heavy is also unmovable. That gives you trust. You can lean on it, and it won't waver. It won't go away. It will hold you. And generation after generation knows the mountain, knows its rhythm, becomes part of it. The train slowed. We approached Feldkirch. I felt that his visit was ending, the separation that was imminent. And the priest packed his small bag, a black coat, a book, a silver cross hanging on a chain, the same cross perhaps that his friend, the wood carver, had worn too. The cross of continuity, the cross of eternity, the cross that says, "We are not alone." Before he left, he briefly laid his large, rough hand on my shoulder. The hand was warm, despite the cold outside. Warmth that came from decades of blessing. He said nothing, but I understood. He blessed me. It was a real blessing, with weight, with strength, with a depth that only people have who've lived long with God. The train stood still. It too seemed to pause respectfully. He stepped out into the cold, and I watched him cross the station, very quietly, very with dignity. His black figure against the white of the snow. His black coat fluttered a bit in the wind, but his walk was firm, unshakable. A man who knows where he's going. A man who's lived this moment 1,000 times, saying goodbyes, accompanying people to their final rest, speaking the words that release the soul. The mountain air streamed in, icy and pure and full of stillness. The air of farewell. The air of eternity. I leaned back in my seat, and strangely, I felt no sadness, only peace. The peace that comes when you meet a holy person. The peace that comes when you know that there are still people who give meaning, who go on, who love. My eyes grew heavy. I leaned back and fell asleep, warm in the compartment, while outside the mountains kept watch, high and immovable and comforting. And my new friend, the priest, went to his funeral, to say goodbye to one he loved, to show the last love. In spring. That was an odd time to be traveling, when the seasons were still uncertain, when the fog sat in the Alps like a ghost that wouldn't leave, a phantom, an intruder that couldn't accept the winter was finished. There was a man sitting across from me on the line from Oberstdorf to Sonthofen. A man I couldn't quite see properly at first glance. He wore an old cape, a gray, tattered thing, almost in shreds, worn cloth that the mountain hunters used to wear in older times. And underneath was almost nothing visible except occasionally a dark shirt, gray fabric. Only his face was visible, unmasked. A face that looked as though it had existed long before I was born, as if time had carved it with deep furrows the way a river carves stone, slowly but relentlessly, each year marking another line deeper. His eyes were the color of a mountain lake, blue-gray, opaque, unfathomable, with a depth that no measuring line could ever reach, a depth that was somehow bodiless, that existed beyond the physical. We barely spoke. There was nothing to say, or perhaps there was too much to say, and it was too complicated for words. It was the kind of compartment where silence isn't rude, but necessary, where it's a genuine need, where words would only spoil it. A silence that's part of the journey, just like the rattle of the wheels or the curves of the line, like the braking at stations. The man looked out the window at the fog, perfectly still, attentive. I looked out the other window at the same fog, the same gray wall. Different perspectives on the same emptiness, the same mystery. And the fog seemed to look back at us both, to see through us, to watch us almost, gray and impenetrable, a wall of nothing almost, a wall of possibilities.
It was as if the world was on the edge of being created and still didn't know what shape it should take. As if the world was in a moment of indecision, a moment of transition. The train climbed higher into the mountains, drew itself up into the heights, and the fogs grew thicker, not thinner, more opaque, whiter, more impenetrable with every meter of altitude. It was as if the world was withdrawing into itself, as if it was hiding from us, protecting itself from our gaze, from our questions.
And then, not because he'd planned it, not because he meant to speak, but because the time was right, because the moment was right, because the words spoke themselves. He said very quietly, very carefully, barely audible above the continuous rattle of the train, the way you speak to someone sleeping and you don't want to wake them, don't want to disturb their peace. The fog is a good friend. That was all. Just that one sentence, that one thought, that one truth that said everything. And I understood immediately, with perfect clarity, that he wasn't speaking about the fog outside, the gray, physical veil pressing against the window, hiding the mountains, erasing the world. No, he wasn't speaking of the outer fog. He was speaking of the fog within. The inner fog, inside oneself, the fog that lives in all of us. The fog where you can't see clearly, where you don't know for certain, where you can't plan perfectly. The fog, that dark fog, where you simply exist, simply wait patiently, simply breathe, until the light comes again, until clarity returns, until the truth reveals itself. It was an absolution of sorts, somehow, an almost forgiveness, a gift. Permission not to understand, not to know everything. Permission not to know, not to be able to see. Permission to be uncertain, not to have all the answers. And the man, this old man with his cape, he kept his cape on, sat motionless, somehow warm despite the cold outside, watching, completely present, completely there. There in a way I couldn't quite understand. And I watched back, watched him, watched everything. Not just him, not his movements or his appearance, but the space between us, the space the fog filled, the space the fog held like a mother holds a child, the space that held the mountains without speaking, without words, without demands. The fog didn't speak. It was silent, hovering, existing. But it held and preserved everything like a secret, like something sacred, like a prayer. And it was as if the whole world consisted of this silence, this complete, absolute, perfect absence of demand, of haste, of purpose, of destiny, of time pressure. The train was a space outside of time, almost outside the normal world, a space where only presence mattered, a place of true peace. The fog was our teacher, our master, our spiritual guide, and we were apprentices to it, or it was apprenticing us, in patience, in silence, in accepting darkness, in trusting what we couldn't see. There was no arrival, no destination, no goal that mattered, no final station, no formal goodbye, no see you again words. The man and I, two completely different people on a train, two souls that had found each other in the fog. We were two people on a train, wrapped in fog, completely alone. Just two. Just a man and myself. And yet not lonely, not isolated. And that was enough. More than enough. It was perfect, complete, whole. We didn't need to talk, didn't need to know, didn't need to understand everything, didn't need to express it all in words. We needed only to be there, present, completely there, breathing, existing together. The fog was our teacher, our master, our spiritual elder almost, and we were good students, attentive, reverent, humble. The train carried us on, ever on, into this fog, through these mountains, and I understood, truly understood, in my deepest core, that not everything in life demands clarity. Sometimes the fog is the answer. Sometimes not knowing is the truth. Sometimes the darkness is the light we needed. And we traveled on, ever southward, down into the valleys. The mountains grew smaller. The fog began to clear somewhat. The man and I, two people on a train, two souls that understood each other without words, in silence, in fog, in a stillness so vast, so encompassing, so deep that it almost became a song, a hymn of silence, a symphony of quiet. The train rolled on, unstoppable. The rattle of the wheels became the heartbeat of the world, the pulse of everything that lives and breathes. And the fog surrounded us like a protective blanket, soft, somehow warm, like a refuge, like a safe home, like a secret you share. And slowly, very slowly, the mountains disappeared entirely behind the wall of grey, completely gone, utterly gone. And there was only fog and warmth and the certainty, the deep, unshakable certainty that everything that hurts, everything that matters, was waiting on the other side, waiting with infinite patience, patient, without impatience, until I was ready, until I'd understood, until I'd accepted that not everything needs to be clear. In autumn, travelling from Emden to Noordijk along the line to the sea, I met a widow who was travelling alone for the first time in 50 years. Completely alone. She was a small woman, compact somehow, as if the years, all of them, all those decades, had compressed her from the ground up, made her into something concentrated, something distilled. And her eyes, I couldn't stop watching them. They were the colour of sea ice, that cold, crystalline ice you see glinting in the sun. Cold and transparent on the surface, but with deeper layers beneath. Stories layered underneath. A life layered underneath. She wore a scarf, grey, worn thin, that smelt of salt and something else. Something I couldn't quite place at first. Something I could smell but couldn't name. Grief, perhaps. Or freedom. Or both together, mixed the way salt and water are mixed. And her hands. Her hands were what you noticed first, what told the whole story. They were cracked and split from a lifetime of work at the water, from salt spray, from cold, from labour. They were hands that knew, absolutely knew, how to work. Hands that had never learnt gentleness, but also never knew fear, never shied away from hard work. Her husband had been a fisherman. That was his life, his whole identity. Not professionally in some detached way, no, though the money came from it too, but truly, really, it was his life, his breath, his heartbeat, his reason for existing. Every morning before dawn, in the darkness, out into the North Sea, that cold, merciless North Sea, with his nets and his hope, and his fear. "The North Sea was cruel," she said to me, and her voice held no bitterness. "It took so much. Men, time, hopes, and gave nothing back sometimes. Nothing but took and took. And yet he loved it, loved the North Sea, always came back to it. It wasn't a rational love, not something you could explain with your head. It was almost like slavery, a dependency, a compulsion. But he wouldn't break it, didn't want to be free. And she, the widow, she'd always been there, waiting, mending, preserving, selling what he brought home, keeping the boats ready, keeping him ready, cooking what he needed and what he'd brought from the sea. And then he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, or perhaps not unexpected at all. Perhaps it was always clear this would come. Not dramatic, no. Not with pain, not with final words. Just too old, too tired, too burnt out. His heart said, "Enough. I can't go on." That was all. And the widow was alone in a house by the sea. A big house, a house built for two people, not for one, with a fisherman's tools on the walls, with the nets, with the photographs, with the memories. And a life that had to become something new, without being asked, without consent, without preparation. She told me, and her voice was steady, not emotional, just factual, that she'd never traveled alone. He'd always been there, always physically present, loud, alive, with big gestures and a voice made rough by salt and years, almost cracking with age. And now the voice was gone, died with him. But the home felt like a place where his voice still echoed loud, where the echoes still lived, still moved like the wind. She saw him everywhere, in the fish baskets by the window that he'd made, in the old sea charts on the wall that he'd used, in the silence of the rooms, in the absence of movement. So she got on this train, this northern line to the coasts he'd loved, that loved him in their way. To... She searched for the word, and her eyes grew wet. Not from crying, but from effort, from trying to say something that couldn't be said. "To say goodbye," she said finally, the words coming slowly. "My husband loved the sea. Well, that's not quite right. He loved it, and he feared it. But he feared it more than he loved it, if I'm honest, now that I can think about it without him there to contradict me. The sea was always his adversary, a kind of beloved adversary, you might say. He fought the waves every single time with all his strength, all his courage. And sometimes the wave won, took a net from him, took a day's catch. And sometimes he won, brought a good harvest back. It was an old game between them, like a dance between two dancers who love and hate each other all at once, who never quite know who'll lead, who'll step first. And she'd decided, sometime on a long night alone in that house, she'd travel to Noorddijk, sit down by the harbour, by the water, and let the sea be for him. Let the waves roll for him, dance for him. Let the fish swim for him. Let the salt sting for him, teach him. And then she could go on living, and the sea could keep going, could keep dancing, and she wouldn't feel guilty for being alive, wouldn't feel guilty for breathing someone else's air, for hearing a different voice. I asked her, carefully, gently, if she was afraid of the sea. She laughed, a short, hard laugh, but without any bitterness behind it. Afraid of the sea? No, no. I've been at the harbour every day for 17 years, every single day, in wind and rain. The sea is my neighbour, more familiar than most people. The sea gave me a husband, gave me 50 years with him, gave me a life that meant something. The sea didn't take him from me. Not really. Time did that. Age. A heart that grew too tired. The sea was just the place, the stage, where time lived, where love lived, or the absence of love, where life happened. She looked out at the landscape now turning towards the sea, the colour growing greyer, the air beginning to smell of salt. I'm not here to say goodbye to him. I'm not here to perform some ritual. I'm here because I don't know how to live without him, how to breathe without him. And the sea knows how to live with absence. The sea lives with tide and ebb, with giving and taking, with presence and emptiness together. Perhaps the sea has lessons to teach me. The train was drawing near to Noorddijk. The landscape became more familiar. The air shifted. The quality of light changed. And the woman turned to the window, leant forward, and her gaze wasn't really on the landscape, but on something beyond it, something that went past the land, on the sea, perhaps, or on a man who was still there, always still there, in the water, in the waves, in the work, in the memory. And I saw her hands relax, those hard, working fisherman's hands, saw her breathing deepen, lengthen, saw her preparing herself inside for a reunion with something she'd always feared, but also always loved. A fear love that was bound so tightly together you couldn't separate the two. And slowly, as slowly as the waves themselves flow and return, without any hurry, the rattle of the wheels began to sound like the sound of the sea to me, became one with it, merged with it. The rhythm became the same, the rattle, the whisper of water, the breathing, all became one. And I drifted down into the deep feeling that we're all fishermen, every one of us, on our own sea of life, gathering what comes, the good catches and the bad, giving thanks for them, letting them go, and waiting patiently for the next tide, the next chance, the next possibility. On the route from Rostock to Sassnitz, in the deepest summer, in that one night when the summer was absolutely luminous, I watched a woman who looked out the window the whole way, from beginning to end, unwilling to be distracted, unable to sleep. She was perhaps 65, perhaps older, with wavy hair that was grey-brown, a mixture of age, and her gaze, her whole focus, her whole attention was fixed on the distant coast, on something she was seeking, or which she knew was coming. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern slid past outside the window, flat, with fields and occasionally a village that shimmered in the summer night with a few lights. The summer was still warm, the air warm even at midnight, unusual, and through the open window came the scent of salt and distant water of something alive, something vast. She barely moved. Her body was motionless, almost rigid, as if the slightest movement would destroy the moment. One hand in her lap, quiet, the other hand against the glass, against the pane, firm, but not pressing. Not pressing, simply present, as if sending something wordless into the distance, as if communicating with something only she could see. She wore a thin, faded scarf around her shoulders, light blue, bleached by years, by sun, perhaps by water. And in her face, in every detail, in every line, was a kind of concentration that went beyond mere attention, that was a kind of meditation, a kind of prayer. I wasn't alone in the compartment with her. There were other people, other passengers, other lives, but it felt absolutely as if everyone else wasn't there, as if they didn't exist. She needed this moment completely alone, needed this emptiness around her, needed the light that came from the other side, from the coast. And then I saw what she saw. I saw it in her face first, saw the change, saw that she'd recognized the light. The lights on the horizon. A single light first, perhaps a lighthouse, or a house right at the edge of the world, right at the edge of the horizon where the earth meets the sea. But it wasn't strong. It was faint, almost tired, like when a person at the end of a long day lifts their hand and makes a small, quiet gesture, a wave that barely has strength left. The light said, I didn't hear it with my ears, but I understood, I'm still here. I'm still there. I haven't gone. And it didn't flicker, not uncertainly. It was steady, constant, reliable, a promise that's kept every night. And I saw how the woman moved, barely perceptible, almost imperceptible. Her whole body changed, relaxed. Her breath became deeper, longer, slower, as if she was finally allowed to breathe properly again. She recognized this light. She knew it from somewhere, from another time, from another life almost. A home, perhaps, a place where she'd grown up, where she was happy. Or a sorrow, a place of grief, a place of significance. Or just the memory, just the echo of a memory, of a time when everything was simpler and the lights shone more clearly, when the world still had colors. Her lips moved slowly, as if she were murmuring something, as if speaking to someone. But no words came from her mouth, no audible words. Just a sigh, deep and long, like when you let go of something you've carried for so long, like when you're finally allowed to set down a burden. The train moved slower, deliberately, intentionally, or perhaps only as it felt, as it was real to my perception. As if it were respecting the silence, as if it knew, intuitively knew, deep down, that this moment was sacred, that something important was happening here, that a moment of transformation was taking place. And the lights didn't grow brighter, didn't intensify in their strength, didn't grow stronger, but they became clearer, sharper in my perception, as if one becomes ever more aware of oneself the closer one approaches the truth, the closer one comes to one's destination, the closer one comes to the core of life. The woman leaned forward, slowly, carefully, almost deliberately, her head nearly against the pane, her forehead nearly touching the cold glass, and her gaze followed every flicker of the light, every glimmer, every moment of presence, every small pulse of the light, as if the light were singing to her, singing a song that only she could hear, a song in a frequency that only her soul knew. I wondered, as I watched her with new attention, when she'd last seen that light. Years ago? Decades ago? In her youth? in a time before lives shifted, before continents drifted apart, before war tore the world apart? Or had she only seen it in dreams, only in her imagination, only in the nights when she slept alone? And now, in this moment, her heart suddenly recognized that it was real, that it existed, that it wasn't just a phantom of her memory, not just a hallucination of age. The woman murmured something under her breath, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Just vibrations, just tones, sound without words. A name, perhaps. A name she'd thought was lost. A place, a person, a life that had vanished. Or a prayer, to the light, to God, to the past. Or just the song of someone coming home, of someone trying to remember, who hopes that the memory is true, that time hasn't destroyed everything, that something lasts. The train rolled on, ever onward, northward to that distant island, ever closer with every kilometer. And the lights grew brighter, nearer, clearer with every minute, with every rattle of the wheels, with every heartbeat. And the woman, this one woman with the faded scarf, remained motionless, completely motionless. Her hand on the glass, her eyes fixed on that one small, steady light, completely focused, single-minded, as if nothing else existed, as if the world had concentrated itself on this one point. It was as if the light were drawing her, magnetically, irresistibly, calling her home, calling her with a voice only she could hear, visible only to her. Not a physical home, no, not a place with streets and houses and neighbors, but a home that lives in the soul, deep within, that exists in the deepest memory, in the layers of life and time. The light that shows us that we were never completely lost, not entirely lost. That there is a place, perhaps only in ourselves, perhaps also outside, that awaits our return, that waits for us patiently, like a friend waits for someone they love. And I understood in that moment, in that profound, clear second, that we all have such lights, each of us, lights that call to us from afar, from the distance, from the darkness, lights that say, "You belong here. You're not lost, not really. I'm here, and I wait for you. Come home." And most people, perhaps most of us, spend their whole lives ignoring these lights, suppressing them, pretending the light isn't calling. But some follow them despite everything, follow them across trains and seas and all the years, across all distance, all time, all change. And my eyes grew heavy with the sight, heavy with the beauty, with the deep significance of a soul that searches for home, that searches for homeland, that searches for the light that calls to it. And the light waited, patiently, without impatience, tirelessly, on the horizon, shining, waiting. And I drifted away, slowly, into sleep, where all lights came together, where all homes came together, and everything became warm, became home, became complete. The sound of rain on the roof of the train, on the route from Cologne to Bonn on an autumn night, reminded me today of something I thought I'd long forgotten, The sound was like static, like the old radio wave flickering between stations. That white noise, containing voices, containing life, that sounded the same before the war and after the war, as if human hope were immortal. And suddenly, I was again, not on this train, but in another life, in another October, many years ago. 75 years, it could be, or 73, or 77. Time loses its power when you remember, becomes unreliable, becomes a kind of continuous present. It was 1948. I worked as a young sound technician in a broadcasting studio in Cologne. The building was still half destroyed by the war. Brick fragments in the garden, the windows nailed with plywood, cracks in the walls that looked like scars, like the scars of a person who'd survived. But the radio wave, it worked. The backbone of reconstruction, the hope of reconstruction. And every evening at 8 o'clock, a man came to read the news. His name was Dietrich Forst. He was old, perhaps 70, a voice like warm leather, like earth, like time itself, holding everything. His voice sounded as if it came from another century, and yet vital, still alive, still full of intention and meaning. Dietrich Forst had just lost his family in the war. His wife, his son, his daughter, all three, together or one after another, I didn't know. Bombs, or perhaps something else. Escape attempts, malnutrition, the desperate wandering at the end of the war. We didn't ask. We knew it from his hand, which sometimes trembled when he gripped the microphone, as if the hand was holding the memory and couldn't let go, as if every fiber still twitched with pain. His eyes were empty and full at once, full of love for those he'd lost, empty of hope that he would see them again. But when the recording began, when the red light lit up, his voice became unshakable. It was a miracle. It was alchemy. The way people can transform pain into service. "Here is German radio from Cologne," he said, "for all who listen, from wherever you are." His voice reached across borders, through the night, into every house that had a set, through the holes in the roofs, through the broken windows, through the grief, the destroyed houses, the empty houses, the houses of sorrow. All heard him. And in that moment, he was not alone. And they were not alone. But the most important experience, the moment that imprinted itself on my heart, came later. On a special evening, an evening that began like any other, my tape machine suddenly broke down. Just like that. A hum, a crack, then silence. We were live. There was no recording device, no backup, no rescue. Only Dietrich and the antenna, and millions of people listening. The whole power of the radio, in that moment, lay on my shoulders. I was young and panicked, truly panicked. I saw black. I thought, it's over. The whole broadcast ruined. My failure would go across all of Germany. But I saw Dietrich through the dividing panel, and he nodded to me. A simple nod. He knew the machine was broken. Perhaps he saw it in my face. Perhaps he felt it. And he simply went on. He didn't interrupt. He didn't doubt. He trusted. His news reports grew even quieter, even warmer. as if he were speaking directly to each person, quite privately, in their ear, in their house, in their heart, as if he were forgiving for everything the world had taken from him, as if he were saying, "You are not alone. I'm still here. The world is still here." After the broadcast, he came to me, and his eyes were different. They weren't quite so empty anymore. He said, "The machine doesn't matter, boy. What matters is that we're still here, that we can still speak, that we can still share thoughts, that we can still speak to the world, even if the world has fallen to pieces. That's enough. That's everything." And you know, his hand no longer trembled. It was as if the work of speaking, of sharing his voice with others, had healed him, at least for that 1 hour, at least for that one evening. It was a kind of transfiguration, a moment in which the pain transformed itself into grace, transformed itself into service. And I understood for the first time that a voice can have a power greater than machines, greater than destruction, greater than war. That words, real, honest words, still have a power, even after everything. I came back many evenings after that to listen to this. It became for me a duty, or not duty, but joy, a grace, to see how this man was rebuilding his life through his voice, word by word, sentence by sentence, each evening's news a step back into life. To see how a person who'd lost everything, wife, children, his whole home, perhaps his hope too, to see how through the radio, through sharing, through connection with millions of invisible people, they became whole again. Not immediately, not completely, but whole enough. Dietrich Forst spoke of everything: news of hope, nixed poetry, small stories of people going on. And his tone grew ever warmer, ever more human, ever deeper. At some point, he told me that he was planning to stop. He wanted to go to a quiet village near Bonn, where an old house was waiting for him, a house that stood empty for decades, a house with a garden, with trees, he said, great old trees that he wanted to plant, or perhaps they were already there, and a stream flowing nearby, a stream song that would always be there. And there, he simply wanted to exist, without speaking, without broadcasting, without the mask, just breathing, just enjoying the silence that he deserved. After everything he'd been through, he finally wanted rest. And I could understand him. I wished him all the best. We shook hands. His hand was worn and dry and gentle, and I never saw him again. That was 1948, and now, 75 years later, my train travels the same route from Cologne to Bonn, and the rain sounds like old radio waves, like the voice of the radio, like the voice of people speaking in the darkness, to reach others, to say, "You are not alone." And I think, Dietrich Forst died long ago. It was surely in the 1960s or 1970s. The village near Bonn perhaps doesn't exist anymore. The house with the garden has probably disappeared, been rebuilt, perhaps destroyed again. But his voice is still on the way. It continues to move through the night, from heart to heart, tangled in the radio waves that still transmit. It lives in every person who, after a funeral, still turns on the radio, not to be alone, to hear that others are still speaking. And perhaps I hear it in this rain. Perhaps I hear it when I fall asleep, when I transform myself into another life. The train slows. The rain grows quieter. My eyes grow heavy, so heavy, as if they want to go home. And I imagine that I'm 20 years old again. Young hands on the tape machine. Hands that made mistakes, but also heard well. Hands that understood what mattered. That learned that humanity is more important than technology. And a voice, very near, very warm, telling me what matters. That we're still here. That we can still speak. That we can still reach each other across all borders. That words, love, connection are the only things that remain after everything else has fallen to pieces. And I fall asleep, very gently, very quietly, with the feeling that I'm sitting in a studio and that everywhere in the world, people are hearing me, and that perhaps I'm also hearing, and that is more than enough. That's all I ever needed. On the route from Trieste to Venice, late in the evening, a woman sat down across from me. I could barely see her in the dim light of the compartment, only her outlines. The silhouette of a person who's lived much, who knows her way. A light blue scarf, grey-streaked hair, hands that she held quiet in her lap. Quiet, as if she already had peace with what comes. She said good evening, and I nodded. And then, neither of us spoke again. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but a silence that was already there before she got on. The kind of silence two old people can have together, without tension growing. The kind of silence that arises when two people meet on a train journey, and both understand that not everything needs words. Words are sometimes an obstacle, not a bridge. She smelled of the sea, or perhaps it was only my imagination, but it was there, that fine, salty aroma, mixed with something lavender-like from an old perfume, a scent from better times. The scent of a woman who travels, who's lived, who's said goodbye to much, and yet is still on the way. The train started, and the rhythm began. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Regular as a heartbeat, as the breathing of the world itself. She rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. Not dramatically, not with a sigh. Simply, the way you close a lid. The way you allow yourself to finally let go. And I saw her shoulders sink, saw her slowly let herself settle into the seat, as if layer upon layer of weight was falling from her. It happened so quickly, and yet not quickly. It was as if she was releasing herself, as if the allowing of sleep, the train, this moment, was a long-denied permission that she finally gave herself. Perhaps she'd been on the move day and night. Perhaps she'd just lost or found someone. Perhaps someone is waiting for her in Venice. Or perhaps she's fleeing from someone, from a past that would stay on the platform. I'll never know. But I saw it. That precious moment when the defenses, the vigilance, the mask, the burden, all fell away, and only pure humanity remained. Vulnerable, open, trusting. And I sat and waited. For what, I didn't know. The train didn't wait. It went ever onward, southward, toward the sea. But I was in the waiting. I was in the observing. Outside, the Italian coast slid past. Lights from small villages whose names I didn't know. Then deep darkness. Then lights again. Each lamp a life, a home, a story. The Adriatic was invisible, but I felt it. The salt in the air. The moisture coming through the gap under the door. A moisture that slowly permeated the compartment. It was a scent backdrop I knew from all my travels along this coast, a memory reaching back decades. The woman slept, and her face lost all tension, all worry, all traces that she'd lived hard. She wasn't young, I could see now. Perhaps 65, perhaps older, perhaps 75. But in sleep, she looked as if she were dreaming of something good, of something she'd once had, or of something yet to come. Her eyes moved behind her closed lids, quickly, back and forth, like small fish underwater on their own journey. I didn't want to disturb. I stayed very quiet and watched this other form of travel. The traveling in sleep, the traveling in dreams, where the trains perhaps move faster, or perhaps don't move at all, but simply hover, hovering through the night, while the body rests and the soul wanders where it must. A hand slipped down, hung over the armrest, open, relaxed, completely defenseless. I saw the age spots, the fine cracks, the rings, a broad wedding ring worn from much living, from many years of togetherness, or perhaps also from solitude. The hand itself told stories. Each line was a journey, each scar a moment she still remembered. That was the hand of a woman who'd lived, who loved and lost, and went on. The rhythm of her breathing was completely peaceful, completely trusting. I was allowed to see this hand, in its rest, in its vulnerability, in its absolute surrender. And suddenly I understood something about traveling. It's not just about arriving. It's about finding a place where you can finally let go. This train, this compartment, was a place outside of time, outside of demands. She could sleep here, because nothing was asked of her here. The train asks nothing. The train simply carries you. The train is the only machine I know that doesn't ask who you are, why you're here, where you're going, whether you have value. The train knows you and takes you, and that's enough. That's more than enough. That's the greatest grace there is. And so we sat, both in this compartment. She sleeping, I awake. I awake because I wanted to stay with her, to see how she rested. It was a kind of duty, or not duty, but joy. To protect this other person through my mere presence, through my attention. That's all you need to protect someone. You just have to be there. You have to see. And I saw. And that was enough.
Hours passed. I read. I looked out the window. I dozed off myself now and then. The woman slept on. Deep, profound, without a sound. Time grew stretched between us both in the compartment. It was as if the night itself was binding us together in this silent patience. Once she murmured something in her dream, a single word I didn't understand. Italian, perhaps, or a name from her past, someone she loved, or loves. I said nothing, didn't move. That wasn't my dream. It belonged to her alone. I was just the silent witness to her rest. And this role, it sufficed me. It was more than I deserved. Sometime before Venice, before we arrived, she slowly opened her eyes. It was as if someone were pulling up a blind. First just a crack, then more and more light. She needed a long time to come to herself, a long time to realize she was still on the train, not at home. The transition from sleep is always difficult. That gap between the world of dreams and the world of reality. She blinked, oriented herself, slowly recognized the compartment again. The window, the seats, the small table. The window through which she would look at the Adriatic when she was fully awake. And then she saw me. Our gaze met for a brief moment, long enough to understand. I didn't smile, and neither did she. We simply nodded at each other. No word, no smile, just this acknowledgement, deep and still and full of understanding. She knew I'd watched her sleep, had observed how she rested. I knew she'd watched me sit quietly, waiting patiently. We shared a secret moment, a moment only possible on a train, this special place where people meet and then part again, enriched by this encounter without ever saying a word. That was enough. That was more than enough. The train braked. We approached Venice. The woman packed her bag, pulled her scarf around her shoulders. It was a farewell, but not a tragic one. Rather, a parting. Like when a dream ends and you wake again, gently, naturally, without tension. She stood up, nodded to me, and left. I watched her go as she left the compartment. Her steps were quiet on the corridor, and she vanished on the platform. I never saw her again, but the impression remained. This quiet moment, this shared rest, this precious realization that you don't always need words to understand each other. The train was now empty without her, but the rhythm remained the same. Ta-dum, ta-dum, warm and soothing. It was as if she'd given me permission to rest too, permission to let go, permission to trust. My eyes grew heavy, and I leaned my head back, very calm, very sure that I too could sleep here. I too could let go. I too could trust this machine. I too could lay down my body
and let my soul wander. I too could simply be while the train carried me slowly, safely into sleep. Into it, where the woman perhaps still traveled too, in her own world, in Venice or beyond.
That was a June night on the route from Würzburg to Bamberg, and I sat in the compartment, the lamp dimmed, and watched a tiny beetle sitting on the top of the window frame. Its wings gleamed like oiled wood, green and dark brown in the folds, and when the moonlight caught it, it lit up like a gemstone. You'll think it's a strange thing to notice on a night full of thoughts, but this little beetle, it was completely still up there, made no escape movement, even though the train lurched and swayed. It held on, you see, with its claws, to a roughness in the paint. The air in the compartment was warm and stuffy from the heating, but through the window seam came a fine draught, the scent of forest and night, mixed with the smell of hot metal under the wheels. The beetle felt that, quite certainly. It was so small, but its body was like a seismograph, sensitive to every slight change. I sat completely still so I wouldn't startle it. My eyes were now the only part of me that moved. Hour after hour I watched, and the longer I looked, the more details I saw. A fine, rough pattern on its legs, tiny structures that looked like a landscape, mountains and valleys in miniature. The way its antennae trembled now and then, a kind of most delicate communication with a world I couldn't see, but which it perceived with the greatest sensitivity. The barely visible rhythmic breathing of its body synchronized with the rhythm of the train, as if it and the engine had become one. And I felt that I was witnessing something sacred, a kind of quiet prayer between insect and machine, between life and motion. And yet, there was something mysterious about it. Its stillness, the way it sat up there, completely motionless, without trying to escape. I wondered how it had got into the compartment. Not through the window. That had been closed since we left Würzburg. Perhaps it had already entered earlier, hidden in a piece of luggage, in a fold of a travel bag. Or it had come at a stop with a traveller who hadn't noticed. A traveller like me. A person who didn't know he was carrying this small existence. The train clattered on. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Regular as the heartbeat of a great machine. And I couldn't stop watching it. The beetle moved slowly along the edge, one step after another, methodically, as if it had a plan, or as if the plan had long since been written into its tiny body. Perhaps its plan was simply to keep living, to hold on to what was solid while everything around it moved. I stared at it so long that my eyes started to burn, but I couldn't look away. In the folds of its wing covers, I saw small crystals, perhaps dew, perhaps something I couldn't name, perhaps just nature keeping its secrets. The moonlight no longer caught it the same way. The moon had moved behind the tree outlines outside, sank deeper and deeper, and now the beetle was lit only by the dim compartment lamp. But that was enough. It was no longer a gemstone now. It was simply a small truth. Proof that life exists everywhere, if you only have eyes to see it. Then I saw that it had a small white spot on its wing cover, a scar or a natural marking, as if someone had painted a tiny cross on it with a fine brush. And this small thing, this one detail, changed everything. It was no longer just any beetle, but this one, this special beetle, with this very particular cross. I would have forgotten it if there hadn't been this one mark, but now I would always recognize it. It's strange how nature works, how it gives all these millions of beetles different small signs, like an artist giving each work their signature. It's as if the world itself were saying, you are an individuality. You're not interchangeable. You count. And I sat there and regarded this tiny cross and felt that I myself am also such a beetle, with my own scars, my own markings, my own hidden signs that only few see. Another man wouldn't have noticed this beetle. Another man would have slept on or looked out the window at the landscape sliding past. But I was here to see it, to see this one special beetle. I very slowly took my notebook from my pocket and sketched it. Not artistically, but simply its basic form. And where the white cross was, I drew it with the greatest care. It was as if I was documenting its life, its existence, anchored it on paper, so that it wouldn't be completely lost if it soon flew away, back into the world that might never notice it again.
The hours passed. Or were they minutes? Time means nothing when you're watching a beetle. The train disappeared into a long straightaway, and the night outside became vast and black. No more lights, only forest on both sides, pines and beeches standing like sentinels, ancient trees that themselves carried their own markings, branches that had broken off, scars from earlier storms. The beetle rested still, steadfast in its stillness, and I rested my head against the window ledge, and suddenly I understood something I'd long failed to grasp. The small things we overlook, the tiny markings, the scratches and scars, those aren't the faults. Those are the identifying signs. That's what distinguishes one beetle from another. That's what distinguishes one journey from the next. That's what distinguishes one life from another. Nothing was monotonous if you looked carefully. I thought of my life, all the moments I thought insignificant, the occasions when I didn't look because I thought the important things happened elsewhere, in great cities, among important people. But this beetle showed me that the small, the unobserved, the overlooked, it's just as significant as everything else. The forest outside was full of beetles, thousands, millions, all with their own tiny crosses, their own signs, their own stories that only they knew. And each one of them was utterly unique, irreplaceable, indispensable to the whole. I stretched out my hand and opened the window very slowly. The draft from the train flowed in, warm and fragrant, with forest and damp earth and something sweet I couldn't name. Perhaps lime blossoms, for June is the time of limes, when all the air in Europe smells of that one glorious flower. The Beetle must have felt the draft, the pull outward, because it began to run, faster now, up the window frame, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. And then it raised its wings, first slowly, then with decided force, and the wind took it, and it was gone, back into the summer night, back where it belonged, where the air was full of other beetles, full of life, full of movement. I watched it go, or I tried to, but it was instantly lost in the darkness, and I knew I would never see it again. There was no chance that I would ever meet this one special beetle with its special tiny cross again. But that was okay. That was even beautiful, because its life, its small, complete life, had intersected with mine for a moment, and that was enough. That's more than most people get. I leaned back in my seat, and my eyes grew already heavy. The train clattered, ta-dum, ta-dum, and the forest slipped past like a dream. I thought of the beetle with the white cross, somewhere out there in the June darkness, perhaps resting on a leaf, perhaps already traveling in another train. I liked that thought, that this beetle could travel too, that it too knew its routes, its paths, its home, where it always returns. And I was completely warm and content knowing that I too had been noticed, that I too had my small markings, and that was enough. The train lurched gently, the window closed, the night outside became night again, and I felt the warmth of the heating take me back. My notebook still lay on my lap, with a little sketch, this portrait of a beetle I would never see again. But it was okay, because I had met it, because I had seen it, because for one night, I wasn't just a traveler heading to the next destination, but a witness, an observer of marvels. And this role, it was fulfilling. It was enough. I fell asleep, slowly, very slowly, with the knowledge that I wasn't alone, that everywhere around me, tiny crosses glowed, signs of presence, signs of uniqueness, the seal of life itself in all its smallest and greatest forms. On the route from Kiel to Eckenförde on an autumn day, when the sun sets early and the sea is already dark, I sit beside an older woman with the sea chart in her hand. Not a modern paper map, not something from a shop, but a map that looks old, with real history, the edges yellowed, the lines hand-drawn and marked, red crosses, blue lines, small notes in ink, the handwriting of a person who knew the sea. "A sailor?" I ask, because I recognize the look, the bearing, the story. People who've spent a long time on the water have a special gaze, a special balance in their body, as if they're still swaying with the waves, as if the water is still in them. She smiles, and her smile is content, is old, is full of memory, is filled with a life that was lived. 40 years, she says, on the Baltic, always on the same map, which I myself marked with my routes, always in the same direction, the same route, nearly every day the same, but every day different. Always into the same love, this love, which doesn't end, which knows no aging.
I ask why the same direction? Why not go everywhere? Why not see the world? She seems surprised by the question, but not unkindly surprised, rather as if she'd been waiting for this question. Because the Baltic isn't large, she says, and because you don't always have to go into the new, not always faster, not always further. Sometimes it's enough to know one thing very well. Sometimes depth is more important than breadth. She shows me the map. Kiel, the small harbours, a few islands, Eckernförde, also some longer routes down to the Danish islands. But one route is marked in gold, always the same, always that line from Kiel to Eckernförde, a small detour over an island, then back. That's my line, she says. That's my route. 40 years. Only that one? I ask, incredulous. Yes, only that one. Always only that one. But, she points to her map, to all the marks, the years recorded in lines. Every year, every season, different routes? No. But every trip, every time I sail that route, it's different, completely different. The wind not the same, the waves not the same, the light not the same, not 1 minute the same, the birds not the same, and my age not the same. I grow older, grow more tired, grow quieter, and my thoughts not the same. My memory changes. My memories change. She looks out the train window at the Baltic landscape sliding past, flat but not empty, rather full of history. If you always sail new routes, new countries, new people, new boats, always seeking escape, always more, then you have many experiences, but you don't really understand any of them. You're always a visitor. But if you sail one route, 40 years long, the same route, the same water, again and again, then you see everything. All the layers, all the variations, all the nuances. You don't see the new, but you see the depth, which is infinite. The train approaches Eckernförde. I can see the sea now, even from here. The waves, grey and green. The colour, the darkness, the depth. The sailor woman looks too, and her gaze is sad, is full of memory, is full of love. That's it, she says. That's the water I've sailed for 40 years. The water I know, that knows me. And now, she puts the map in her pocket, carefully, as if giving the water a letter. Now I'm too old. My eyes aren't as good, can't see as far anymore. My hands shake a little when I'm tired. And the wind has always grown stronger, or I've grown weaker, softer. Either way, both are true. Will you miss it? I ask. The sailor woman thinks for a long time, her eyes far away on the water. Yes, she says at last, but not the sailing, not the hard work, not the responsibility. I'll miss the silence. When you're far from the coast, when you have only the boat, the water, the sky, the birds, the fish, then the silence is so absolute. There are no people, there are no roads,
There are no sounds except the water. There's only the fact that you breathe and the boat moves under you, and you're safe. But you could die, could drown, and it doesn't matter, because you're alive, now, in this moment. And that's all. That's enough.
That's loneliness, I say.
No, says the sailor woman, and she looks directly at me. Her gaze is clear, is wise. That's not loneliness. Not in the way people use the word. Not the feeling of abandonment. That's solidarity. With yourself. With the water that carries you, that knows your weight. With the sky that watches you. With life, which doesn't need people to be real. Which doesn't need speaking to mean something. Eckenförde is here. The lights of the city show themselves, yellow and warm. The train slows, and I feel the whole force of the brake. The sailor woman stands up, slowly, with deliberation, with the dignity of a person who has lived. She puts the map deep in her pocket, as if it will be safe there. The last time, she says, that I sailed that route, I think it was in June, this June. The wind was ideal, not too strong, not too weak. The sun in the evening sun was golden, was everything that matters. And I was old, but I was also young, because I knew it would be the last time. And so, I sailed like a young person, fast, hopeful, with joy. And when I returned to the harbor, she looks at her hands, at the hands that have steered so much. When I returned, I tied the boat to the anchors, and I never went back. She takes her bag, an old brown leather bag. The compartment becomes larger without her, but also emptier. Emptier still. But you know, she says before she goes, the boat, it's still there, moored to the anchors. It will wait for me. And the water, it's still there, flooding and ebbing with the tide's understanding. And perhaps, on an evening, when I can't sleep, when I miss you, when I can't bear my solitude, I'll go to the harbor, not to sail, just to stand and breathe the salty air, and to know that I had 40 years to understand the Baltic. That's not little. That's not small. That's everything. That's a life, complete. On the line from Venice to Udine, the morning after a wedding day, I sit beside a young couple that's just married. Not older than 29, 26. So young, I'm not quite sure they have responsibility for their love, that they already know what it means to feel bound. They're still wearing their wedding clothes. His suit is a bit wrinkled, a bit dirty from the night before. His tie has loosened, shirt buttons open, and the suit smells of sweat and alcohol and joy and ecstasy. And her dress, it's not an elegant wedding dress with a long, expensive train, but a simple, beautiful, white summer dress. Practical, that she probably chose herself. Not bought just for this one day, not for photos, but really to live in, to dance in, to sleep in. They hold hands, but not constantly, not in that permanent way lovesick people sometimes show, that nervous clinging. Sometimes they let go, sometimes take again, as if love breathes, as if they need to give themselves space,
as if closeness also has rhythm. And they don't really talk, not all the time. I notice immediately. They just sit there, still, present, silent with each other, looking out the window at the Italian landscape slowly passing, green and warm and endless. The fields, the vineyards, the small houses on the hills, all receding, all passing by. The woman closes her eyes slowly, very slowly, as if falling into a dream, and I see she's very tired, that the tiredness sits in her bones, in her face, in the way she breathes. Not because she's old, not because love has tired her, not that, but because a wedding, it's work, it's performance, it's almost pain. The noise, so much noise. The 100 guests, all with eyes, all watching, all the expectations, unspoken and spoken. The photos, cameras everywhere. The mother's tears flowing uncontrolled. The speeches of fathers and brothers. The dances. All the force. All the noise. All the strength you need to smile, to be present, to play the role the world expects. Everything. And now she sits here, on the train, far away. And she's finished with the day, but not finished with the night before, when the wedding really happened. Private, intimate. When she wasn't a daughter anymore. When she wasn't her parents' child anymore, but became a woman, a wife, someone new. The man looks at his hands, at his new wife beside him, at the 2 rings they now wear, the golden ones that gleam like light, like hope. And I notice that he too knows his wife is tired, that he sees it, that he feels it, that he knows without asking. He says nothing, absolutely nothing. No words, no comfort, no empty sentences. But he says everything with his calm, with his mere presence, with his acceptance, with his love that doesn't need to speak. He says with his whole body, "It's over. It was hard. It was wonderful, yes. But hard, yes. Very hard. You can rest now. Breathe now. Just be now. I'm here. I'm here with you." After a while, maybe a whole hour, an hour of silence and dreaming, the woman wakes. She's really slept, deeply. Her head on his shoulder, her breathing calm and reliable as the train itself, as the rattle of the wheels. And she doesn't move away quickly, not ashamed, not unsettled, not embarrassed. She still leans against him, her shoulder against his, and both look out the window at the landscape, still green, still warm. The air still soft from the nearness of water, of horizon. "Udine," says the woman, very quietly. Not the name of the city, not a greeting to the destination, but a statement, almost a sigh, almost a realization. We're already at Udine. Not as a goal, not as an arrival, but as the next step, as what comes, as the reality that waits. "Yes," says the man. "And then?" The woman breathes out slowly. "Then, I don't know. The car's waiting. My parents are nervous. The honeymoon is in 2 weeks. We're going to the lake. She sighs, not unhappy, just tired. It's a lot. No, says the man, very calmly, very gently. And he doesn't say it cruelly or critically, not harshly. He says it like a fact, like a simple truth, like when you see the sun in the sky and say, "There's light." That's not a lot. That's normal. That's how life usually is. That's the life we meet at the beginning, before the wedding, after. Tomorrow, the day after, normalcy comes back, like tide and ebb. The car waits. The parents are nervous. Work calls. The honeymoon is in 2 weeks. Everything will start. But today, he looks at his hand, which holds her hand, his hand touching her fingers. Today is just us. Just us two. Simple. Quiet. That's all we have. That's all we need. The train slows, and I feel the brake working, the whole force of the machine trying to lose speed, to slow down, as if the train is also practicing patience. The green fields of Friuli Venezia Giulia pass by, slowly, slowly, so slowly you can see the trees individually, can distinguish the leaves, the shapes of the meadows, the roughness of the soil. A village, small, with houses with red roofs, with white walls, with people living their daily lives, completely unaware of this young couple on the train. A river, brown and slow, lazy, flowing under a bridge, as if it too measures time. Fields again, growing greener, warming in the midday sun, yellowing at the edges where the earth is dry, where the summer burns. The woman leans her head on the man's shoulder again. But now she's no longer tired, no longer lost in sleep. She's simply there, present, awake in a new way, awake in a way she wasn't the day before. And I understand, completely, with absolute clarity, this is real marriage, the real one. Not the wedding, not the celebration, with all the guests and the expensive flowers and the white designer dress and the church and the mother's tears and the father's speech. But this moment, here, two people on a train, knowing that normalcy comes in an hour, that parents are waiting at the station, that the car waits, that the honeymoon waits, that the whole life waits. But not now, not yet. Now just silence. Hands that hold each other, warm, reliable. A window a little open. The fields passing, green, endless, infinite, indifferent to their love, their fear, their hope. "Are you afraid?" the woman asks. Not fearfully, not hesitantly, simply asking, honestly. Like when you ask, "Are you thirsty?" or "Are you tired?" A question that expects you to tell the truth. The man answers quickly, not because he has no time to think, but because he already knows the answer long ago, the right answer, because he's thought about it all night while lying awake. Yes. Afraid, yes. But not now. Now I'm just happy that you sleep, that you can sleep, that you trust me enough, that your body trusts me, that we're both calm, that no noise troubles us, that he gestures at his wedding suit, wrinkled, almost dirty, the tie hanging over the seat, at her white dress, no longer white but creamy, worn, almost stained from the long night, that we still wear what we wore yesterday, that the wedding isn't over, even though it is, even though the church is left, the guests gone, that this hour in between, this silence, belongs to us alone. That's all we have. Udine grows larger. The lights come closer. Bright, electric, artificial. The city wakes. The platform approaches. The station lights. The cars parked. The people waiting. Family, probably. Waiting with nervous looks. With cameras. With questions. With plans. But the young couple still sits close together, not far from each other, and they don't move. They don't hear the announcements. They don't see the city. They just sit, and their eyes grow heavy, heavier. Their eyelids fall slowly like blinds, like windows closing, and both fall asleep, beside each other, hands holding, warm, reliable. The wedding clothes wrinkled, crumpled, worn. Their breathing synchronized like a heartbeat. Two people who've become one, at least for this moment, for this hour. And reality waits patiently outside, inevitable, on the platform, with cameras, with questions. But for now, they sleep. And I think this is the real wedding, not the day with 100 guests and cameras. This is this hour, this silence. These two people sleeping, touching, knowing deep in their souls that everything will become hard, that normalcy is merciless, that life isn't like the wedding, not like the church, not like the celebration. But now, in this moment, on this train, in this compartment, before reality takes them in its arms, before the world changes them, now they're safe. Now they're together. Now they're alone. And that's the only thing that matters. That's the whole life, the whole essence of love, compressed into 1 hour between two stations, in two people sleeping, whose hands hold. On the line from Biel to Delémont, in this Swiss train, smaller than the German ones, sits a woman with bottles. Not just 1 or 2 bottles, but 8 or 9, all with dark glass, all with handwritten labels, in elegant old script that looks like music, like dancing on paper. She wears a brown wool jumper, hand-knitted probably, and the yarn still has little irregularities, little signs of the hand that made it. Her hands are very pale, pale with age, but her nails are dark brown or grey, from something that can't be washed away, that's burned itself into the skin over the years, a kind of physical memory of her work. The train sways a bit, and the bottles clink softly, a gentle sound, like wind chimes in a garden of time. "You're interested?" she asks me. I haven't said anything, but she knows I'm looking. I say yes. She smiles, and the smile comes from deep wrinkles, from a face that's smiled a lot over the decades. The smile is warm as fire. "I'm the distiller," she says, and there's no doubt in her voice, only truth. "From the Jura.
And these? She shows me the bottles with a hand that moves gently, like when you touch sacred things. That's my whole life. In bottles, in patience, in waiting time that's been transformed into color and flavor. I ask what's in the bottles. She takes one and holds it against the window, against the October light that falls at an angle, that turns it red, that turns it orange, that sets the whole bottle on fire. The contents are yellow, but a special yellow, gold and dark all at once, like the sun sitting in a room, captured, enchanted. It smells from a distance, a scent that's warm, that's bitter, that's sweet all at once. Kirschwasser, she says, and her voice grows quieter, deeper, as if she's speaking of something sacred. From the cherries that grow in my garden, on the hill, on the south side, where the sun stays long. But not just the cherries, also the leaves, the green, the fresh ones, the stems. They can be so bitter, so gloriously bitter. The stones, everything that the cherry is, everything it carries, everything that makes it. The stones? I ask, surprised. The stones are the most important, she says, and her eyes gleam like water in the sun, like the bottle against the light. Nobody knows that. Everyone thinks the stones are waste, are rubbish, are something you throw, that you forget. But in the stones, there's the soul of the cherry. That's where the truth sits. That's where the secret is. That's the bitterness, the deep, adult bitterness, the depth, what it really means to be a cherry, not a sweet illusion. If you take only the fruit, if you throw away the stones, you have only sweetness, only surface taste, only the shallow truth. Sweetness isn't enough. Sweetness is empty, is really nothing, is a child who doesn't understand the world yet. But bitterness is intelligent. Bitterness is the language of life. Bitterness is ripe. The train travels through the Jura hills, yellowish-brown hills gently undulating like the sway of a dance, meadows gleaming golden in the light. Between them, small villages with white houses and red roofs, like toy villages from another time. The light is autumnal, slanting and warm. It licks at the window, which is slightly steamed from the heat trapped in the compartment. The wheels rattle below us. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. A soothing rhythm, a heartbeat carrying life. The distiller looks out, and it looks as if she's calling home, as if she sees her fields, her trees, her whole life waiting there on the hills. My house, she says, and her eyes are very far away now, seeing not the window, but the hills. Her hills. It stands on one of these hills. This hill there, do you see it? I shake my head. I don't see it. Only hills and meadows and sky. No, of course not. It's too far away, too small with the distance. But there's my garden, my cherries. 100 trees, maybe. All old, all known, almost with names. My blackberries, growing wild by the wall. And there's my cellar, under the house, under the earth, where it's cool, always cool, where the temperature stays the same, where I take the clear mountain water that comes from the spring that's so cold, so pure, and cook it together with the fruit, together with sugar, sugar from beets from a neighbor, together with time, with the long months. And then patience, waiting, observing, smelling, every day smelling. That's the most important thing. How long? I ask. That depends on the fruit. The cherries, maybe 2 years, sometimes 3. The pears, that can be 5 years. The herb schnapps, that took 9 years. She points at a dark green bottle. This one, that's my oldest, 9 years. All 9 years I've known what's sitting in that barrel. I went to the cellar every day. I tasted, tried, watched whether it was becoming right. And then, one day, I knew it was ready. How do you know that? I ask. The distiller sets the green bottle carefully back in its row, as if she could help the glass remember, as if she's speaking with the glass, quietly, lovingly. The smell tells you everything. The smell at the beginning, brutal, green, not finished, almost screaming, raw like an open wound, like something not yet ready. The smell after 3 years, more complex already, but not right yet, not mature yet, like a child growing older, but not yet adult, still confused. The smell after 9 years, there's calm in it. There sits silence. There's peace. There's patience in every molecule and understanding. And when the smell has peace, when the fragrance says, it is enough, it is complete, it is finished, then it's finished. Then the life that sits in this bottle has become perfect. And then you have to let it go someday, I say. The bottle leaves your house. I give it, not sell, not profit. Give. Only friends, only family, only people I know that I want to drink it, who will understand. And when they drink it, when they take a sip, then they don't just experience a schnapps, not just a drink. They experience 9 years of patience, 9 years of waiting, 9 years of believing it's worth it. She shows me another bottle, amber red, as if the sun had been poured into liquid glass, as if light itself were captured, awakened to life. This is blackberry. 2 years of patience, 2 years of waiting and smelling and observing. And a few months ago, I gave a bottle to a woman who was old, older than me perhaps, who would soon die. You could see it in her eyes. You could feel it in her presence. She was in hospital. White walls, fluorescent light, her family visiting her, nervous, sad. And she, this old woman, she took the bottle in her trembling hands and wept. She wept without speaking. And then she said to me, "Thank you. This is the most beautiful gift, the most beautiful. Now I know there are people who still wait, who still have patience, who still believe that not everything needs to be quick. That gives me hope, that the world isn't completely mad, not completely lost, that there's still gentleness." And now, I ask, are you too old to continue? The distiller looks at her hands, at her old brown hands, the hands of a craft, of a life, that have worked so much, that have pressed and kneaded and stirred so much. Yes,
I'm 78. My hands, they're not as strong as they used to be. Not as sure, not as fast. The climbing to the cellar, the dark, cold stairs down. I have to hold the railing. It's got worse this year. It becomes hard, increasingly hard. The bottles are heavy. The barrels are heavy. Time grows heavier. But she gestures toward the bottles with a kind of pride, with a kind of love. The last 3 barrels in my cellar, they're not finished yet. One still needs 2 years. It still smells too young. Another one, who knows, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time has no meaning for schnapps. Time is a different thing down there. Maybe my granddaughter, Anna, will finish them. She's learning already. She has the feel for the work. Maybe I'll do it still, if God gives me the time, if my heart wants to. That's fate. That's life. But patience, the discipline, the love, the secret that the world has given to patience, that patience I can pass on. And that's enough. That's everything. That's more than everything. Delémont gets closer, the city lights growing larger, brighter, denser. The train slows. The rhythm of the wheels grows uneven. Ta-dun, 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 ta. Like something growing tired. The distiller packs her bottles slowly, each in a soft, rolled cloth that she probably knitted herself years ago, each with great care, with a kind of ceremonial love, like wrapping an infant. Each bottle is a person, a life, its own heart, a moment in time that will now travel, that will change the world for someone who drinks it. The autumn outside is orange and golden, almost red, almost fire. And I know that the barrels in her unseen cellar, deep under the house, under the earth, in the cool, in the eternal darkness, will still grow older, still wait patiently, still breathe, still practice their transformation, still plant their patience, still ferment their love. And I think there are still such people. People who don't believe that time is money, that time must be money, that time is only loss. People who believe that time is transformation, that time is love, that time heals. That if you wait, if you really pay attention, if you go to the cellar every night and smell, if you believe, if you know that the heart of the cherry sits in its stone, that bitterness is truth, then you can create something that not only tastes, that not only burns on the tongue, but also heals deeper, that touches the soul, that makes old women weep, that gives hope. And that's a gift, a great gift. In 9 years, in 2 years, in all the years you still have, and in the years you no longer have.